What if the person who saved your life didn't even ask for your name? And what if that same person, mud on his boots, a $20 tent to his name, was the only one who ever made you feel truly safe? This isn't just a story about survival in the snow. It's about love born in the most unlikely place, and the courage it takes not just to fall in love, but to fight for it. Most people dream of being rescued by someone rich, famous, powerful. Claire, she was a powerful one. The daughter of a billionaire, the face of a global empire. Someone who never had to light her own fire, until the night everything froze. Jack, he wasn't even on the map. No home, no plan, just a worn-out backpack and a quiet heart that had learned to live without being needed. They were never supposed to meet, but the mountains had other plans. One snowstorm, one overturned car, one stranger who refused to walk away. And what came next wasn't just a rescue. It was a beginning. In the next 30 minutes, you'll discover. White heavy checkmark, how a silent hiker changed a billionaire's life without saying much at all. White heavy checkmark, why love built in the wild sometimes stands stronger than palaces. White heavy checkmark, in the moment when Jack stood up to the people who tried to erase him just because he didn't belong. But before all that, let me take you back to that night, to the sound of wind screaming through trees, to footsteps crunching through snow, to a man with no money, who gave everything he had to save a woman the world thought had everything. Hot beverage ready? This story starts with a blizzard and ends with a promise. Let's begin. Jack had always been more at home under the stars and under a roof. While the world raced toward meetings and mortgages, he drifted along forgotten trails, trading city lights for campfire sparks and silence that stretched for miles. He wasn't running from anything. Not really. But he wasn't chasing anything either. Just a quiet kind of peace. The kind you only find when the world forgets your name. That's where he was the night the storm rolled in. The sky didn't warn him. It never does. One moment, it was still a blanket of dusk over the trees. The next, a wall of white. Wind that didn't just bite, it howled. The kind of storm that doesn't ask permission. It doesn't knock. It devours. Jack could have stayed in his tent. He should have. He'd camped half a mile off the trail, tucked between two ridges that offered a bit of cover. But something tugged at him, something far off in the snow, a strange shape, unnatural, almost like a car. Most people would have turned away. But Jack knew what it meant to be lost in the cold. He also knew you don't ignore instincts in the wild. So he zipped up his coat, covered his face, and stepped into the wind. What he found wasn't just a car. It was a luxury SUV, turned on its side, nearly buried in snow, one headlight still flickering. And inside, a woman, unmoving, pale, slumped over the wheel. Her lips were blue. A cut trickled blood down her temple. Her coat, expensive, beautiful, was soaked through and clinging to her like a frozen shroud. No one else around. No tire tracks. No footsteps. Just her. Jack didn't hesitate, didn't wonder who she was, didn't think about whether she belonged to his world or not. He grabbed his multi-tool, pried the door open with frozen fingers, and checked her pulse. Faint, but there, and that was enough. Sometimes, life hands you moments that don't look like choices. They just are. You don't decide whether or not to act. You just do. Because something inside you remembers what it feels like to be forgotten. That's what made Jack move. Not heroism. Just a heart that didn't know how to leave someone behind. The lesson? You don't need a title, a bank account, or a plan to change someone's life. Sometimes, all it takes is a pair of cold hands and a refusal to look away. Wrapped in his arms, she didn't even stir. Jack could feel her shiver, her breath shallow and strained. He adjusted his grip, holding her tighter, and began the slow, treacherous walk back toward his tent. With every step, the wind fought him. But Jack had made up his mind. She wasn't going to die out here. Not tonight. And that was how a man with nothing and a woman with everything began a story that neither of them saw coming. Let's step into the tent with them now. As we continue with part 2, a stranger in the snow and the first breath of hope. Inside the tent, the world narrowed down to just three things: cold air, shallow breaths, and the quiet rise and fall of a woman who hadn't yet opened her eyes. Jack worked quickly but gently. He laid her down on his only sleeping bag, stripped away her wet coat, and wrapped her in layers of dry blankets, his jacket, his extra shirt, anything he had. Then he waited. He rubbed her hands, placed heat packs along her chest and back, and whispered words he wasn't sure she could hear. "Stay with me? Just hang on. You're safe now." He didn't even know her name. Didn't know if she had a family waiting, or if she'd driven up there alone for reasons he couldn't imagine. All he knew was that she looked too fragile to be real. Long lashes, high cheekbones, a bracelet that sparkled even in the dim light of the camp stove. And yet, in that moment, none of that mattered. She wasn't an heiress, or a stranger, or a headline waiting to happen. She was just someone cold and broken. Someone whose life was balancing on the warmth of his heartbeat and the shelter of nylon walls. Sometimes we forget how powerful presence can be. Not words, not answers, just presence. It's not about having the right thing to say. It's about being the person who stays when things get quiet, when they get scary, when the wind won't stop screaming. That's what Jack gave her. Even when she didn't respond, even when she trembled in her sleep, he stayed. And then, as the storm howled louder and his body began to shake with exhaustion, he felt it, a shift, a tiny breath, not force, not gasping, just real. Her eyes fluttered, only for a second. But in that second, Jack saw it, the life coming back. She whispered something he couldn't quite make out, a sound softer than wind, but it was enough. Hope doesn't always come in a sunrise or a speech. Sometimes, it's just a stranger's arms wrapped around you in a tent you didn't know existed. Sometimes it's one breath, just one. That means the worst might be over. The lesson? You don't have to save the world. Just show up when it matters. And sometimes that's enough to start turning everything around. By morning, the storm had eased. The snow was still heavy, the cold still biting. But inside that tiny tent, something had changed. She was alive. And Jack, he realized he wasn't alone anymore. Not really. So, let's stay with him a little longer. As the sun rises and her eyes finally open for real, the first thing Claire noticed when she woke again wasn't the pain in her head. It wasn't the tightness in her chest or the unfamiliar weight of the blankets around her. It was the warmth. Gentle, steady, real, like something she'd forgotten she could still feel. She blinked slowly, the light filtering through the canvas ceiling soft and pale. Her voice came out in a whisper. "Where am I?" Jack looked up from where he crouched, boiling water on his tiny stove. He smiled, relief plain on his face. "You're awake." He handed her a small tin cup. "Try this. Just warm water, but it'll help." She took it with trembling hands. And for the first time, she really looked at him. In the light, he didn't look like a rescuer. His hair was wild, his jacket patched in places, his boots coated with layers of ice and dirt. But his eyes, they held something steady, something calm, the kind of presence that made fear ease without a word. Over the next 2 days, as snow continued to block the pass and cold sealed them like a snow globe, the tent became something else entirely. It became a world. Their world. Jack shared everything he had. Canned beans, dried fruit, one pair of thick socks, now hers. He taught her how to warm her hands properly, how to stay hydrated with melted snow. He even made her laugh once, with a story about trying to cook over an open fire and accidentally setting his pants on fire. And Claire, in return, began to unfold. Not all at once, but slowly, carefully, the way people do when they spent their whole lives being told to keep their guard up. She told him her name, that there had been a deer, a sharp turn, then nothing. But she didn't tell him who she really was. Not yet, because for the first time in years, Claire wasn't being treated like a brand or a project or a headline. She was just Claire, wrapped in blankets, eating instant noodles, laughing softly at a stranger's terrible jokes. And sometimes, that's how trust is born, not in grand gestures, but in quiet, awkward meals, in shared silence, in someone giving without asking. The lesson? You don't need time to build trust. You need presence, consistency, and kindness with no agenda. Because real trust doesn't come from knowing someone's resume. It comes from knowing they'll stay beside you when the world outside goes cold. On the second night, the wind picked up again. Not as fierce as before, but enough to make the tent groan and the air feel thinner. Jack glanced at her. She was shivering under blankets, her cheeks flushed. He reached over, touched her forehead. Too warm. His jaw tightened. You've got fever again. And just like that, the calm cracked as survival rushed back in. Let's stay with them now. As Jack is forced to make a difficult decision to save her again, this time with nothing but body heat and quiet courage. Claire drifted in and out of sleep that second night, her fever rising like a tide she couldn't fight. The warmth of the blankets wasn't enough anymore. Her hands shook. Her breath grew shallow. Jack lit the stove again, boiled more water, crushed the last of his aspirin into it. He didn't panic, but something in his eyes tightened, a kind of quiet urgency. And then he said it. This is going to feel strange, but it's the only way I know to bring your temperature down. She blinked up at him, barely conscious. Okay, she whispered. Jack zipped open the sleeping bag and crawled in beside her. Layer by layer, barrier by barrier, gone. He wrapped his arms gently around her, letting his body heat transfer to hers. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was human, raw, vulnerable, necessary. That night, the storm outside softened into a hush. But the real storm, the one inside, began to settle too. For the first time, Claire stopped trembling. Her fever broke before dawn. And when she woke again, for real this time, the sun was already breaking to the tent flap, painting her face in pale gold. She turned her head. Jack was crouched by the stove, stirring something that smelled vaguely like instant oatmeal and desperation. Hey, she croaked. He turned, grinned. Hey yourself. There was no dramatic music, no swelling orchestra, just warmth and the quiet relief of survival. She drank water, ate a little, blinked at the sunlight like she wasn't sure it was real. Then she asked the question she'd been holding. You've been here this whole time? Jack nodded. Didn't have much of a choice, did I? But Claire knew better. He had a choice. He just made the right one, over and over again. And in the way people do when they've been taught to keep walls up, she said the one thing that mattered most. Thank you. Sometimes, the greatest truths don't arrive with lightning. They come quietly, wrapped in warmth and humility. That morning, Claire didn't remember her title. She remembered his voice telling her not to sleep, his hands keeping her warm, his presence steady as breath. But life, as it always does, came rushing back. Just past noon, the distant thump of rotors cut through the silence. A rescue helicopter, bright orange jackets emerging through the trees. The world had found her again. Within minutes, she was bundled into a thermal blanket, oxygen mask, questions she couldn't answer, apologies she hadn't rehearsed. Jack stood off to the side, silent, watching. She looked for him as they lifted her into the helicopter. Their eyes locked. There were no words, no promises, just one final look. And then she was gone. Sometimes people leave not because they want to, but because the moment doesn't leave them a choice. The lesson? Not every goodbye comes with closure, and not every connection is measured by time. Some people walk into your life for just a few days and leave an imprint that lasts forever. Jack stood in the snow long after the sound of the blades had faded, hands in his pockets, backpack slung over one shoulder, the tent empty behind him. He didn't know her last name, didn't know if she'd remember him, but he remembered her, and that was enough. For now. But stories like this, they rarely end that cleanly, because sometimes, when the snow melts, the truth begins to bloom. Claire woke up 3 days later in a room full of light and silence. The storm was gone, the snow a distant memory, and the man who saved her nowhere in sight. The sheets were soft. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling. A vase of lilies filled the room with a quiet sweetness. But it wasn't until she reached up and touched the bandage on her forehead that the memory hit her, not as a thought, but as a rush. White trees, ice, spinning headlights, a crash, and then Jack, his voice, his hands, the heat of his body against hers in that tent, the way he whispered, "Don't fall asleep, just stay with me." That was the moment she remembered who she really was. Claire Rowan Heiress, daughter of Walter Heiress, sole heir to Rowan Group, the luxury real estate empire. But none of that felt important anymore, because the only name that mattered in that moment was Jack. She sat upright, her chest tight with something she hadn't expected. Guilt. She hadn't said thank you properly. She hadn't even asked if he was okay. She just left, not because she wanted to, but because the world had scooped her up again, strapped her into a helicopter, and flown her straight back to the life she'd been born into. A life that didn't ask, didn't wait, didn't notice what was left behind in a snow-covered tent. Claire stared out at the skyline, a city humming beneath her, people moving in straight lines, phones ringing, plans being made. But all she could think about was a man with wind-burned cheeks and hands that held her life without ever once asking what it was worth. Sometimes it takes losing yourself to remember who you are. Jack didn't ask about her last name, didn't ask for money, didn't take a picture or ask for a story to share. He just showed up, stayed, and then let her go. And maybe that's what makes someone unforgettable. Not what they give you, but what they refuse to take. That night, Claire sat at the edge of her bed with her assistant's tablet in her lap. Instead of answering investor emails or reviewing site maps for the Aspen Resort, she whispered just one sentence. "Find him." "Find who?" Maya asked. "His name is Jack. I don't know his last name. He was camping off Ridge 6, West Trail. He saved my life." Maya hesitated. "That's not a lot to go on." "I know," Claire said softly, "but I need to find him. I need to thank him. I need to—" She didn't finish the sentence, because deep down, she knew this wasn't just about gratitude. It was something deeper, something harder to name, but impossible to forget. The lesson? Sometimes, the people who leave quietly are the ones who change everything the most. And sometimes, the only way to move forward is to go back and finish what your heart started. And so, Claire began to search, not just for Jack, but for herself, for the version of her that felt safest in a snowstorm with a stranger, not in a skyscraper with a title. Because the truth was, the world might have forgotten Jack, but Claire never could. Claire had once overseen billion-dollar deals. She negotiated contracts across continents, sat at boardroom tables with men twice her age, and never blinked. But nothing had prepared her for how hard it would be to find one man who didn't want to be found. Jack had left no forwarding address, no phone number, no social media trail, just the echo of his name and the memory of a tent buried in snow. Still, Claire searched. She skipped meetings, ignored press calls, even missed a private gala her mother insisted she attend, because nothing else mattered until she looked him in the eyes again. She reached out to the rescue team, pored over search reports, called park rangers and camp volunteers. She traced weather patterns, permits filed, even scanned trail camera footage, just in case. And finally, one name surfaced. A backpacker, young, solo, seen near Ridge 6. No ID, just kindness. That had to be him. She sent a discreet team to locate him, not press, not security, just someone to deliver a thank you. But money in the wrong hands doesn't say thank you. It says go away. Jack was sitting on a bench in a small mountain town when a sleek black SUV pulled up. Two men in sharp suits stepped out. "Jack!" He nodded cautiously. One of them handed him a slim envelope. "A token of appreciation," the man said. Inside, a thick stack of cash. More than Jack had seen in years. Jack didn't say a word. He looked up slowly. "Who sent you?" "Someone grateful," the man replied, but also concerned. "Miss Rowan's life is delicate. You were never meant to be part of it." Jack's jaw tightened. I don't want her money. We're not asking you to take it for the money. We're asking you to take it. A pause, and walk away. He didn't shout, didn't curse. He just folded the envelope, tossed it onto the bench, and stood. You can tell whoever sent you. He met their eyes, calm but firm. Keep the money and stay out of my life. The thing about money is, it reveals more than it hides. Used right, it builds. Used wrong, it buries. And in that moment, Claire's well-intentioned gesture had become something else entirely. Something that said, you're not welcome in this world. The lesson? Gratitude offered with conditions isn't gratitude at all. And love wrapped in power can quickly turn into control. In the days that followed, Jack noticed things. A man pretending to read a newspaper, but always nearby. A car parked across from his hostel. Eyes that looked away too quickly when he met them. He knew what this was. Not a thank you, not a coincidence. It was a warning. Until one night, walking back from the market, 3 men stepped out of an alley, blocking his path. No words at first, just fists. A blow to the gut, a punch to the jaw. Jack hit the ground hard. You don't belong with her, one of them hissed. He tried to get up, but they were too fast, too deliberate. They didn't come to scare him. They came to break him. But before the next hit landed, a car skidded to a stop nearby. A door flung open, and a voice, sharp, clear, unmistakable, cut through the air. Stop. It was her. Claire, hair flying, eyes wild, heels forgotten on the pavement. She ran to Jack, dropped to her knees, wrapped her arms around him like he was the only thing keeping her breathing. I found you, she whispered, voice shaking. And just like that, the world turned quiet again. Claire had walked countless red carpets in her life. She had given speeches in auditoriums filled with applause. She had worn gowns sewn by hand, smiled in front of flashing cameras, and nodded at men who praised her with polished lies. But she had never, not once, dropped to her knees in a dirty alley, cradling a bruised man against her chest, whispering, I'm here. I found you. Until now, Jack had barely opened his eyes. Blood traced a slow line down his cheek. But when he heard her voice, something in him flickered awake. Claire, he rasped. She nodded, her eyes brimming. I'm so sorry. I didn't know they'd do this. I've been looking for you everywhere. She turned to men who had attacked him, men who suddenly looked much smaller under her furious gaze. Touch him again, she said, voice shaking with rage, and I will destroy everything you work for. They hesitated, not because she was angry, but because they believed her. It wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. And in that moment, Claire wasn't the heiress to a billion-dollar empire. She wasn't the perfect daughter, or the public figure, or the woman they tried to protect with distance. She was just a woman in love, and she didn't care who saw it. She turned back to Jack, brushing the hair from his forehead with trembling hands. I should have told you who I was, she whispered. I was scared, but I'm not running anymore. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, tried to read between the bruises and exhaustion. And in that stillness, Claire leaned closer. I don't care what they say. I don't care what the headlines write or what boredom I walk out of. I'm not giving you up. There are moments that change the rules of your entire life. Moments where you stop asking what's allowed and start asking what's true. This was one of them. Because love, real love, doesn't care about titles. It kneels when it needs to. It speaks up when silence is safer. And it stays, even when it's told to leave. That night, Claire wasn't the queen of her world. She was the woman who chose him, in public, in pain, in full view of everything her family built and everything the media would twist. The lesson? Sometimes strength isn't standing tall. Sometimes it's kneeling in an alley, choosing someone no one else would have picked for you, but who your heart never stopped looking for. They sat there for a long while, her arms around him, his head resting against her shoulder. The men who came to erase him slowly retreated into the shadows. But Claire didn't even look at them again, because the only thing that mattered now was that he was still breathing, and she wasn't letting go. But the world wouldn't stay quiet for long, because love like this, The world loves to watch it burn. The night of the Rowan Foundation Gala, everything sparkled. Crystal chandeliers glowed like frozen stars. Servers glided between guests with glasses of champagne. Strings played a soft, elegant melody that floated through the room like silk. And Claire looked like she belonged to it all. She wore an emerald green gown that shimmered as she moved, the kind of gown made for headlines, for power. But her eyes? They searched the room like someone who had lost something, or someone. Jack stood near the back, still as stone. He wore a suit picked out by Claire's assistant, expensive, tailored, far too stiff. He smiled when expected, nodded politely, said little, but inside, he felt like a ghost in someone else's story. The city, the spotlights, the way people talked in polished tones and perfectly measured questions. It wasn't his world, and the longer he stood in it, the more it crushed the air from his lungs. Someone handed him a glass of scotch. "What firm are you at again?" The man asked, casual, effortless. Jack didn't answer. He couldn't. He just placed the glass down, turned, and walked away. Out the side door, down the marble steps, into the dark. Outside, the rain had started, soft and cold, like sorrow that didn't ask for permission. Jack loosened his tie, shoved his hands deep into his coat pockets, and walked. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't breathe where he'd been. Sometimes love means leaving, not because you wanna, but because staying means becoming someone you're not. And Jack had promised himself long ago he'd rather be alone and true than surrounded and hollow. Inside the ballroom, Claire felt it instantly, his absence, like something had snapped inside her chest. She looked around once, twice, then she ran. Out the doors, into the rain, through the city streets in that shimmering gown, now clinging to her knees, hair soaked, mascara streaking. But she didn't care. She never cared less about appearances than she did in that moment. She found him 2 blocks away, walking slow, head down. "Jack," she called. He turned, and the look in his eyes nearly broke her. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice low. "You walked out. I don't belong in there." She nodded, breathless. "I know. Neither do I. Not without you." He looked away. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be in all of this." Claire stepped closer. "You're supposed to be you. That's who I fell in love with." There's a kind of bravery that doesn't look like armor or battle cries. Sometimes it's a woman in heels, standing in the rain, refusing to let the one she loves disappear. Claire's voice cracked. "I'd rather live in a cabin with you, drink bad coffee, wake up to the sound of birds, than stand in a palace and feel nothing." And Jack didn't say a word. He just pulled her into his arms, held her tight as the rain poured over them like a blessing. The lesson? Sometimes we chase the life we were told to want, only to realize that peace lives in the places we never planned for. That night, they didn't go back to the gala. They didn't go back to the apartment. They didn't check the news or answer calls. They just stood in the rain. 2 people soaked to the bone, but finally, drenched in truth. And after that night, they stopped running. From the world, from each other, from themselves. Not long after that rainy night, Claire and Jack did what no one expected. They disappeared from the city, but this time together, not to escape, but to begin. They went back to the mountains, not to survive a storm, but to build something that could outlast one. It started with a simple idea. What if the place that brought them together could do the same for others? They called it Pathway North, a community-based tourism project rooted in respect, tradition, and love. No glossy resorts, no gated estates, just eco-trails, handcrafted cabins, and partnerships with the very people who'd lived there for generations. Jack brought his hands, calloused, steady, familiar with the forest. Claire brought her name, still powerful, but now used for opening doors instead of closing them. They spent months visiting villages, meeting elders, listening to stories, asking questions before offering answers. They didn't come with blueprints. They came with open hearts. There were setbacks, of course, skepticism, logistics, weather, But there were also moments that felt like magic. A classroom built from reclaimed wood, where children traced letters beside a view of snowy peaks. A footbridge restored across a rushing river, uniting two communities once divided by geography. A local woman teaching Claire how to weave red thread into her hair, laughing as Jack tried and failed to do the same. Love doesn't always look like poetry. Sometimes it looks like dirt under your nails and bruises on your shins. Sometimes it looks like showing up when no one claps. And Jack was never more alive than when he was building something that didn't have his name on it. Claire stepped down as CEO of Rowan Group. The press called it shocking. Her family called it foolish. But she called it freedom. "I'm not walking away," she told reporters. "I'm just walking somewhere better." The lesson? Sometimes the life that makes the most sense on paper isn't the life that makes your heart beat. And sometimes true legacy isn't about what you leave behind, but what you choose to build now. And the thing they were building, it was working. Local artisans thrived. Children danced barefoot at festivals. Travelers came not to consume, but to connect. Pathway North was never just a project. It became a movement, a bridge between worlds that once thought they'd never meet. But the story doesn't end here, because in the middle of a village square, beneath a sky filled with stars and firelight, Jack had one more thing to build. 1 year later, the snow returned, this time softer. It blanketed the trees in gentle silence, curled over rooftops like a hush. But in a small wooden cabin tucked deep in the pines, there was warmth, not just from the fire crackling in the hearth, but from the voices inside, from laughter, from life. Claire sat curled in an armchair, wrapped in a thick blanket, a notebook resting on her lap. One hand scribbled gently. The other rested on the curve of her belly. She was writing, not for the press, not for the boardroom, but for herself, for the girl she used to be, for the woman she became when she stopped surviving and started choosing. Across the room, Jack stepped in from the cold. Snow clung to his boots. His cheeks were red, his breath still crisp with mountain air. He smiled when he saw her. "Still working on your masterpiece?" he teased, shrugging off his coat. Claire looked up, eyes soft. "I'm trying to tell it right. Not just what happened, but what it meant." He knelt beside her chair, rested his hand gently on her belly. Their child stirred beneath it. "Our little one," he whispered, "might just be the best part of this whole story." She laughed softly, her fingers covering his. Or she's already doing flips," she said, "probably practicing for a snowstorm." There was no audience, no applause, just two people in a cabin, choosing quiet, choosing love, choosing each other again and again. Sometimes the greatest life you'll ever live won't be the one that others admire, but the one that finally feels like home. Pathway North continued to grow. Villages flourished. The project became a model for how love, respect, and listening could build something lasting. And Claire, she no longer stood on stages, but her presence was everywhere. In classrooms she helped fund, in scholarships she quietly gave, in stories told by local girls who now dream bigger. Because she once sat down and listened, Jack became something of a legend, the man with a backpack who saved an heiress and stayed, not for headlines, but for healing. The lesson? Family isn't always blood. Home isn't always where you started. And love? Love is what you build when no one's watching and you decide to stay anyway. Outside, the snow continued to fall, thick and peaceful like a lullaby. Inside, a fire danced, a story unfolded, and a future stirred gently beneath the pages of a well-worn notebook. When people hear this story, they often ask, was it luck? Fate? Just a wild coincidence? But the truth is, it was choice. Over and over again, Jack chose to step into the storm. Claire chose to see the man, not just the moment. They chose to listen instead of assume, to stay instead of run, to build something together when everything around them said it couldn't last. This wasn't a love story that began with fireworks. It began with frostbite, with silence, with borrowed warmth. But sometimes that's where the strongest love begins. In the quiet, messy places where two people meet not in perfection, but in truth. So if you've ever felt like you're too far from where you're supposed to be, too lost to be found, too ordinary to be chosen, remember Jack, remember Claire, because their story isn't about luck. It's about hope, and the kind of love that shows up with muddy boots, tired hands, and a heart that refuses to let go. Fire, thank you for being here, for listening with your heart. If this story stirred something inside you, a memory, a longing, or simply a quiet smile, Orange Heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Michael Stories. And if you believe in second chances, tell us in the comments. What's one quiet moment in your life that changed everything? We'll be here, listening, always.